Good evening or good day, everybody. Whenever you hear this, this is the Dave Emmons Show, and this is Dave Emmons. And twice weekly, I try to put out shows with interesting people that are experts in their areas. And I've got an expert just like that. We had a chat. He's from UK, and he's a good mate, really jolly. And we talked about music and all this other stuff. He's a musician, a drummer. He's actually got an album coming out this spring with his band, and it's the band is named it's Copperworm, and they're kind of a rock band, and they're doing their own stuff, so that's great. We had a good talk about that. But my guest today is Mark Olly, and this will be the first segment. We have two segments on Mark. He's going to cover 2 hours, so we limit it to 1 hour though on the show, and then the second one might drop it 3 days later. Mark Olly is an internationally recognized author, TV producer, presenter, writer, lecturer, broadcaster, musician, and artist. Wow, talented guy. He's got me on that artist thing. I can't draw. He is a visiting lecturer at Wilmslow Guild and the University of Chester, heads up his own archaeological unit, and runs a DVD production and props company, Mythco. He lives in Cheshire, UK, and he's got several books. He's an author also. We're going to be talking about a couple of those books beginning right about now. And Mark Olly from the UK, glad to have you on the show, buddy.
A pleasure to be here. Absolute pleasure.
I mean, mate. No
mate. Mate's a bit Australian, isn't it?
Oh, really? Okay.
Well,
I just interviewed a couple of Australian guys, so I guess I got caught in that dialogue.
Okay, if you drift into an Australian accent, I'll let you off.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're an archaeologist, and you've been on some digs, I guess.
Yeah. I started very early because my dad was a volunteer digger back in the 1950s and 60s. So very early on, 1970s, he had me down a trench digging up a Roman site. I was about 8 years old at the time, so I started off as a volunteer. But I did train formally with Liverpool during my later teenage years. I did that for quite a long time. And then as I drifted off into the music business, I kept up with it as best I could till eventually I went professional. So I ended up leaving archaeology at that point. But then as I came out of the music business much later on in life, I've drifted back into archaeology again. I'm a little bit older, so I don't do as much digging as I used to do, but I write an awful lot more books. So it leads us very nicely back into literature. So for the last 20 or 30 years or so, I've been doing books and producing stuff for television, which has been very good. I suppose I can exclusively reveal that I'm actually on the new series of Ancient Aliens. I'm one of the interviewees for that. So I'm on 4 episodes, I think, in the next season.
Wow.
So that's good fun.
It's right here in the U.S. That's big time. Ancient Aliens. That's a big show, and I guess it's a big show in UK also. But
we have it here.
You are talented, my man, and I'm glad that Philip Mantle referred you. I mean, Philip Mantle's a great guy. I've known him and had him on the show and talked to him. But he's a great person. I'll give him a shout out.
I've got to give Philip a plug. It's Flying Disc Press. Philip Mantle, anybody wants to get any of the books from Flying Disc, absolutely brilliant. He's a superb fella as well. So if anyone out there wants to book him for conferences as a speaker or interview him, feel free to do so. He's one of the best publishers I've ever had. So hats off to Philip.
He's got so many books out there, Mark. He's just he's phenomenal. He writes his own books and he publishes. He helps other people. I've actually known some people. He's helped them get through their books, and so he's a great guy. He's doing a great job. And the association with you, Mark, it just shines a light. These friends stick together, and birds of a feather. You're both great people and very talented. I just want to dig into some of your talents.
By all means.
And the archaeology thing, we were just starting to talk about that until I threw in Philip Mantle, and we both had to pause for him.
No, it's all right. I mean, the archaeology is quite a good one because I've been doing that for many, many years. The first few books I had out in the 1990s were archaeologically based, but very much regional to the UK. Then there's another 3 books after that, one on the disappearing Ninth Legion, one on the Green Man, another one on the life and times of the real Robin Hood. Those 3 are out there. If you want to get any of my books, by the way, just go to Amazon. I don't need to advertise. I don't need to push or plug. Go on there, type my name in, click, swipe. 3 days later, they come through your front door. So Philip's books are exactly the same, and it leads nicely then into the Crystal Skulls and Human Heads book, which is the last one I did. I don't know if anyone is anyone going to see this on video, or is it audio only?
Yeah, you can know it's you're on
there
video,
we go.
So behave yourself.
That's the one. Crystal
there
Skulls
it is.
and
Crystal
Human Heads.
Skulls,
There it is.
Human Heads by Mark Olly. There it is.
Move it across there. You might be able to see it a little bit better. That's
sure.
the book.
Yeah, and they can replay the video.
Yeah, if folks want to have a look at that, that's anyway, you'll find me on Amazon without any problems at all. That's the first book that we're going to talk about tonight, is the Crystal Skulls one. It's archaeoscience.
Right.
So it's because of its science content, the last chapter, I tend to float into aliens and the issue of alien DNA because it's based on the shape of skulls and the shape of heads. Right. Obviously, the elongated skulls are in there, and a lot of other skulls associated with aliens, which are actually, most of them turn out not to be aliens. Most of them turn out to be different species of us. That is the driving force behind that book. But it was so odd and it was so quirky that the archaeological press didn't really take an interest in it. But Philip did. As we said at the beginning, bless him, he's a fabulous publisher, and he picked up on it, realised the potential in it. It was written during lockdown, so obviously when we had the whole pandemic thing, worldwide, it kind of made everybody realise that nothing lasts forever. We're all sort of mortal. And I thought, well, what better subject to tackle, but the extinction of various branches of mankind. We're not complete as a species now. There have been extinctions. And that was the driving force behind the book. So all of my archaeological background, obviously, has gone into that. It's gone into that book.
Well, I can see why Ancient Aliens liked you, because they do a lot of archaeological digs, and they get involved in proving ETs.
The clue's in the title, isn't it? You've got two words: ancient, there's your archaeological bit, and aliens. Well, that could be the future. It could be, who knows where we're going next, kind of thing. So I met Giorgio and Eric at a conference they were doing over here.
I like his hairstyle.
Well, yes, yeah. It's ended up. I think we've ended up becoming like the three wise monkeys. The hear all, see all, and say now. We've ended up with Giorgio wearing his kind of desert tan smart jacket and that, and you've got Eric wearing his blue one because he always wears the blue one. Right. So when I went on, I thought, blow it, I'm going to wear red. So I wear a red jacket. So if you get the three of us lined up, you'll be able to tell who we are by the color of the jacket.
Yeah, I can't wait to see those episodes. You say there's 4 episodes and the folks here in the U.S.
The first one's only just aired. It's the one on crop circles, which I believe went out about a week or 2 ago, and I'm on that. I'm on the crop circle one. I'm on the trailer for that as well. So it was loads of fun doing that, because over here we have so many crop circles. They turn up all the time. So it was a fabulous subject. And from an archaeological point of view, I mean, the main thing of archaeology is physical. If somebody tells me there's a UFO crashed in the backfield, I'll go and dig it up. It's that kind of, that's where I'm coming from. So to physically have things like crop circles, it's a great subject to lead in with. I don't know. I can't remember all the other subjects I did. Like I say, I think there's 3 or 4 episodes in the new season where I appear. I think there was one on obelisks. I think we did obelisks as well in Egypt, which was quite an interesting one. Obviously, as an archaeologist, they're fascinating.
Right. So I just finished the book myself, and it's in the publisher's hands. But it's about angels and Egypt and ancient gods, little gods, G-O-D-S, little. Yeah. But you got into this stuff, Mark, as an archaeologist, and you're educated in this area, and you went and found some stuff. Could you tell us what some of the weird things you found?
Oh, God.
Not weird, but maybe scientifically, maybe incredible.
Well, there's quite a few bits and bobs like that. I mean, over here we have this thing called the Danelaw, which is where back in the 800s or whatever, King Alfred the Great, who was a very famous king over here, he decided that we were getting invaded by loads of Danes and Vikings. So he kind of went, Vikings one side, and Anglo-Saxons the other, because he was an Anglo-Saxon. And he made a lot of forts. He made a lot of different hill forts, fortifications and what have you. But there was a whole string of them up here that were missing completely. So I'm credited with having been found and partially excavated one of those. So it's not every day you walk into a field and go, oh, look, there's a castle. You know, there's this huge mound with a ditch. Nobody knew it was there. Nobody had the foggiest idea. So that's pretty strange. Again, flying saucers, you know, I mean, you get this friend Gary Rowe, a friend of mine that ran a UFO group. He phones me up one day and he says, you know, we've got this UFO crash down in a little village called Clonilla near Aberystwyth. Do you want to come and investigate that? So I'm like, well, yeah, all right then. You did say crash. And he said, yeah, it was a crash. He said, I've got some pieces of the UFO in my garage. Well, as an archaeologist, that's like, wow, you know.
Yeah. Bingo, yeah.
I mean, I know they've excavated Roswell. They've had archaeologists out there and they've been sieving sand to get little tiny grains of metal out of the sand and that.
Yeah,
well, over here,
got my Roswell shirt.
Got the Roswell shirt.
I don't know if you can see all that, but it's underneath the jacket. But I'm into the UFO thing real big, and I know that's why I asked you about the weird stuff that you found.
Well, yeah, I mean, this guy's got socking great big pieces of this thing, you know, sat in his garage. So he's got bits of foil and all kinds of stuff, and he has had it analysed, and it's definitely alien to us. You know, the material wasn't around when this thing came down, so it's a very strange story indeed. But I can return and tell you more of that in the second half of this year, when the book that I'm not allowed to talk about comes out.
Right. Yeah. There's certain things you can't talk about a book because you have to wait for the copyright. You know, you got to wait for Philip to get there.
Waiting in the wings, because it's 40 years since this thing came down. So it seemed appropriate to do something as the anniversary of that. So that's coming later in the year. That's the next one.
Now, in the segments on ancient aliens, Mark, some of the topics you covered, you covered, I guess, the crop circles. I've been on a couple of those investigations with some people, and it's very interesting how the crops lay down, and they defined, I guess, how the crops. Could you tell us the difference between somebody taking a board, like you had those two guys?
There is this. Yeah, we had whatever it was, Derek and Clive, those two with those boards and all that. Well, when they do that, when they go around with a board, if you look at the stem, it leaves actual scrape marks and lines, so you can tell it's been flattened using a board. Right. The ones that are real, they tend to appear incredibly quickly. They can appear where there's witnesses who don't actually notice them appear. So the most famous one, I think, is a huge, it's like a massive spiral, and that appeared in a field next to Stonehenge, and none of the tourists noticed it. It appeared in a time window of about 20 minutes, and there's something like 96 different circles. So there's no way anyone can run into a field and produce anything that size within, minutes. There is film footage, which, bless them, ancient aliens actually tracked it down. There's film footage from the 1990s of a silver ball whizzing round a field, and as it whizzes round this field, you can see the crop dropping underneath it, and then it whizzes off. So it's clear that produces that pattern. When you actually get in these crop circles, there are electrical anomalies. There are things that make your hair stand on end, and the crops have actually dropped from the joints in the actual grain stems. So they're kind of microwaved, and then they fall. So they drop in a certain way. So it's almost as if the pattern's already been created somewhere, and then it's imposed onto the crop. Right. And then the idea of going around doing all this detail, there are some of them that have got sort of half-tone images in the back. They're like digital images superimposed onto crops, which are just impossible. And some of the crops, I mean, if it's in rapeseed or anything like that, it's just mind-boggling. There's no way that a human being could get in there, do that, and get out and not leave any traces. It just absolutely beggars belief. There are, however, quite a lot of fakes out there, so you do have to be careful with the ones that are obvious.
Now, the nodules, Mark, look like they're kind of burnt microwave. Is that microwave burnt?
If you get them under a magnifying system, if you magnify them, you can actually see that the joints in the grain have been sort of bent, if you like. They've been superheated at the joint, and it bends the crop, and the crop drops. And this is something that's been known since the 1990s. So they've known this for 30 odd years. And it's not something you can do, with a blowtorch or with a board or with a piece of string or rope. It's not done that way. And the early circles, the ones that were authentic but quite primitive, were all done that way. So no, it's not two men with a huge plank of wood. It's not. There's quite a lot of ones out there that are genuine. And they leave messages as well. There was one left recently in this country within the last 10 years, where the message in a big circle is actually binary.
Right.
There was another one that was left that was a response to the plate that was on Voyager. Remember the Voyager satellite we fired out into space? We left an information plate on there with something to do with genetics and DNA. And blow me if in a field it didn't appear the same plate but with a different set of data. I seem to remember we're carbon-based life forms. This thing that came back made it look like they were silicon-based. So it's really interesting stuff. I mean, I've done the background, and that some of that creeps out in Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. It's in the last chapter, alien heads. So that kind of leads nicely back into the book.
Yeah, but I'm amazed at what you're covering. You cover everything in this archaeology, and of course, I'm amazed because you're a musician. I'm just, I'm giving you kudos, buddy. So that's great, and not only that, but you're producing music, and you got an album coming out. And people, this is fantastic. This is a talented man. I'm really excited having him on my show. Mark, Olly, tell us a little bit more about some of these digs that you've run. You said something about elongated heads or whatever.
I've not actually excavated elongated heads, not in terms of being down the hole with a trowel, but I have been to South America, and I've been to Egypt, and I've been to several other surprising places like Bulgaria and Malta and France, where you wouldn't expect to find them, but they're out there as well. I've done a certain amount of work with folks from Russia. So archaeologically, the scope for these elongated heads and stretched heads and different species of humans, the scope is extremely broad. It's worldwide. They are literally everywhere. So if somebody really wants to get into it, that's why the book's Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, because we've got the crystal skulls. I mean, that's kind of the technological side of human heads, if you like, but we've also physically got the human heads, and there's a story there with the different shapes of human heads and the different species, and it was a good commonality to hang everything on through the book. It's a nice thread that runs all the way through, because everybody knows what a human skull is. Everybody's got a human head. Every human that's ever lived, has a face, and that's what we're drawn to. So all of that archaeology and all the journeys I've done over the last 15, 20 years, they all feed nicely into that book. I also own one of the crystal skulls. I own a sort of 500 to 700-year-old Aztec skull, life-size one. Yeah, quite a large one. He's in storage at the moment, but having got that's a real springboard. That's a real incentive to go and write a book about it.
Where'd you get that at, Mark? You buy that off of the guy who found it?
Oh, no, I was gifted it. It's got an interesting story. In the 1940s, there was an aid worker that was helping out with the Mayans in South America after the war, and he was from this country. I don't know which company he went out there with, but he was working with this village. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the Mayans don't really get on with the Aztecs. The two are completely different cultures.
Yes.
So this village had one of these Aztec crystal skulls, and they really appreciated the work that this chap had put in the time he was there. It's probably 1947, 48, something like that, late 1940s. So they gave him one of these skulls and said, here, put this in your rucksack. When you go home, take it with you. It's a gift from us. So he's like, yeah, fine, okay. As he started to get older, he realized that, as the custodian of this thing, he couldn't really hang on to it. So by the time it got sort of into the 1980s, 1990s, it turns out he's connected to the Freemasons in this country. So he went to his lodge. He went to his lodge master, and he said, I've got this skull. I don't know what to do with it. I need to give it to somebody who's younger than me. Unfortunately, the guy who was the lodge master was quite a considerable bit younger. So the skull then passed to him. Now, I happen to know him. He is this particular lodge master now is elderly himself. So he came to me and he said, I've got this crystal skull. You're an archaeologist. You'll appreciate this. You're into your mysteries, etc., etc. Do you want this skull? Do you want to be the next custodian of this skull? So I am keeper of that particular skull for the time being till I get too old for it. And then who knows, it might end up in a museum somewhere. You never know. Or even, the way things are going now, it might even get returned to, South America at some point. But it's been on a journey.
Mark, there's supposed to be how many of them? 12. And when they find all 12 of them, they're supposed to resonate a frequency.
Well, there's a very famous photograph. If you go on the internet, there's the Mitchell Hedges skull, which is the sort of the big one, the real work of art.
Right.
And then there's a ring of 12 other skulls. They brought them all together. I think it was in the late 1970s. And there's one, like I say, particularly famous photograph. The skull that I own, if you go round this ring of skulls, it's the bottom left-hand skull. It's actually on that ring of skulls that was brought together and reunited with the Mitchell Hedges skull. Worldwide, archaeology-wise, though, there's probably only a couple of skulls that you can definitively say are absolutely 110% Aztec. You know, they were excavated on site, or they remain on site, or they're in one of the museums in South America. The book obviously covers this, so we're into book territory now. And then there's a lot of other skulls. There's the early ones that were found, which are the ones that I'm talking about, the one I've got and quite a few others. And you've got to be careful now, because there are tens of thousands of these things which are modern.
Yeah.
There are so many modern ones now. It's a real shame that the whole market has been flooded by fakes. At the moment, the big problem is fake UFO stuff. You know, there's loads of fake alien stuff coming out now. And it just destroys it. You know, any credibility, any, you know, reality just gets destroyed.
Mark, what about the machine marks on these skulls? Are the new ones, the modern ones, have better machine marks, or the old ones?
Yeah, in the book, I actually go into this in some detail, how to establish whether or not the skull is real. Obviously, if there are machine marks on there, forget it, because, you know, they're made in the last 150 years, made on grinding wheels, and they're polished and they're super perfect, so you know where you're at. If you're looking at a skull, though, if it's sort of the size of a small child or bigger, so in other words, if it's life size, and you're looking at this thing and you're thinking this is handmade, because there are signs that will tell you that it's handmade, you'll be able to tell how it's been carved, you'll be able to see the way it's been produced, then you're starting to head in the direction of what I would call a real skull. If they've paid attention to detail with the crystal itself as well, so let's say they've cut it according to the, you know, the way the crystal is. Oh, my cat's appeared. Look at this. Isn't he lovely?
Yeah, your doggy was there a while ago. Now your kitty cat. Okay.
No, the kitty cat is the one that's the size of a dog. He's huge. Look at this thing.
Wow.
So, and he always does this. He always wanders in.
Yeah.
Go on, shove off.
No,
So yeah,
they love you. They love you, Mark.
And if you've got one anyway, if you've got one of these skulls that's essentially, you know, life size, and it's got some kind of a history to it, you've got a rough idea where it comes from. It's clearly not machine made. You know, it's got these handmade marks on it. And again, if they've made an enormous amount of effort, let's say on a quartz skull, to try and polish all of the tool marks out, then chances are you're dealing with something close to a real one. The modern ones, they just don't make the same effort. You know, you can easily tell the difference between one that's handmade and older, and they just can't date stone. It's a real shame at the moment. They can't date stone. They're looking at the idea that stone loses moisture, and that might point towards being able to date it over time, because it loses moisture over time. Right. If they can get a chronology of that, then archaeologically they might be able to date them. But yeah, there's just not that many, you know, knocking around. It takes hundreds of hours to hand grind, you know, by manual means, a large lump of hard crystal. It takes a long time, and nowadays people are just not willing to put the work into doing that, really. Mitchell Hedges is interesting, though. That's been electron microscoped, that one, microscopy, I'll nearly said that. That's been used on that to check it out. There aren't any marks on that one.
Really?
So if somebody comes along and goes, guess what, the Mitchell Hedges is a fake, the next question's got to be, well, how the hell did they make it?
Yeah, really. That's hard to do. In your book, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, The Mystical History of Glass and the Extinction of the World. Now, you mentioned here that what the planet really is how something as simple as a few grains of sand revolutionized civilization. How extinction may simply be a part of nature. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, well, as I started to investigate the crystal side of things from the science point of view, I started to realize that actually we've kind of missed a trick. We're talking now because of the wonder of silicon chips. You know, right. It's Silicon Valley. It's the whole use of that. Silica is glass. That's what it is. It's basically sand, as a chemical. If you want to get silica, you go melt sand. So glass has been with us for centuries, and we kind of take it for granted. It's in our windows, we make glasses out of it, we do all kinds of things out of it. But actually, silica is crucial. It's really important because it's one of the most abundant, if not the most abundant, substance on planet Earth. And the reason for that is that when they came to model the planet to find out whether or not we had a big lump of iron in the middle and whether or not that was why we were magnetic, when they came to model it on a computer model, they actually came down on the fact that the actual core of the Earth is made of silica. So we're sat on this enormous crystal flying through space. That's basically it. So I started asking questions about silica. Where does silica appear in the human body? How does it affect us? Believe it or not, in the womb, the bit the silica develops is the brain. So you're back to the skull again. Silica, it takes us back to the human head. And then all of a sudden I had this kind of light bulb moment where I'm thinking, maybe that is the reason why they started making crystal skulls. Because they realized that within the body, somehow silica was important to the development of the brain, to the development of the skull, and that's why they made skulls out of it. So I started finding all these connections, but it's kind of ancient super technology. And then over here in the UK, they came up with this. They've come up with this glass disc, and they can write on it in 5D. It's a computer disc. You could get the entire of human history, all the books ever written, onto one of these discs, and it'll last for over 30,000 years. And they can read the disc. Obviously, it's such high technology. They're going to do it in a laboratory now. And I was thinking, well, you've got this idea in a lot of the crystal community believe that there's things written into the crystals. You've got these things called recorders, and that used to be, people used to laugh about that at Mind Body Spirit fairs. You used to go, can't be true, it's impossible. And then I'm thinking, well, okay, if you've got this thing called an Atlantean recorder, this ancient crystal, double terminated, the only thing that we can't do is read it. However, we know that you can write it because we've got silica, we've got these glass discs. If we can do it now in a lab, why couldn't somebody in the past do it? It's a kind of super technology. So at the moment, the jury's out. We don't know what's written into silica. Even the ghosty boys, it's not in the book, so this is extra material. The guys that do the ghost busting, the ghosty chaps, they've said for a very long time that maybe it's the silica in buildings, it's the sand, it's the crystalline content of buildings that's causing ghosts and spirits to effectively replay under the correct circumstances. Maybe it's the environment that's replaying these things over and over again in repeat apparitions. There's a possibility that could be what's happening here. Somehow we're unlocking the energies within silica. So basically we're a carbon-based life form living on a silicon-based world. Everything out there is silica. It was touch and go whether we ended up being silica, but you can't make as much complexity from silica chains as you can from carbon. So that's why we ended up being carbon. But it's just amazing. Probably the second thing that was created on the planet when the planet was forming, when it was coming together, was glass, was silica. So it's there at the beginning. It'll be there at the end. It's one of those.
Look at the diamonds that's so precious to us, Mark.
Oh yeah.
And you said, I'm kind of reading from your notes here from the book.
Yeah.
There's a life and death passage through realms largely unknown to us, but not to those ancient giants of intelligence who came before us. And we had a president, Teddy Roosevelt, early on in 1900. He said there's nothing new under the sun. And
absolutely.
I think he was a Knights Templar or a Mason, and I guess he got into those studies. But could you explain that to us? Ancient giants, we're not talking about tall, the big 14-foot, 15-foot giants, are we? Or are we talking about just intelligence-wise?
No, if you look at the Crystal Skulls book, it covers both. What you can prove from history, archaeological remains, geology, rocks and fossils, the thing you can prove is that the diversity on planet Earth is reducing over time. We know, for example, there were about 34,000 different unique species here at the end of the last fossil era, whereas now we've only got about 18,500 surviving species. And that's true genetic species. That's a creature that doesn't really have any other equivalent. It's a very distinct genetic chain. That number of genetic chains, though, that number is decreasing. It's just decreasing. There's nothing we can do about it. It's almost like somebody wound the planet up, chucked it out there into the universe complete, and it's been winding down ever since. And that seems to be the process we're seeing. So when I say giants, yes, of course there were giants out there. There were giant versions of us, the same as there were other species, and miniature versions of us, the same as there were other species. But in the same way that other species are reducing, so let's look at bears, for example. There's probably only 20 to 30% of the bears that have ever been still alive. Well, the same thing's true of us. There's probably only 20 or 30% of humans with unique DNA that are still alive. The more you'll start to look at the fossil record, you've got the Denisovans, you've got the Neanderthals, there's a couple of eastern species of mankind known as Eurasia 1, Eurasia 2. There's all these different species are coming up. The giants presumably were also another species. You got these little hobbit people out in the Philippines. They're probably another species.
Right.
They've not even been DNA tested yet, but the potential's there. So we know that we were more diverse, and they are getting less and less. So the interesting part of the book, and this is the real kicker, is these guys with these elongated heads. Now, the elongated heads are genetic. So the question I ask in the book is, okay, if you've got a skull, let's say that's 3 times the size of a normal human, that means inside that skull, you've got a brain that's 3 times the size of a normal brain. So immediately you're looking at, if this guy was born with the kind of talent, let's say, that Einstein or Stephen Hawking or any of the greats had, he's got 3 times the capacity right from the word go. So then I always tell this jokey story where, supposing you get 10 of these guys with this enormous head, they're all sat round in a room, and you walk into the room, you go, I want to know how to build a pyramid. Well, about 10 minutes later, they're going to come out with a piece of papyrus with, this is how you build a pyramid, because they'll have worked it out, because they've got these supercomputers, biological supercomputers. And if you get an entire species of humans with capabilities like that, then all of a sudden, we start to look quite barbaric. We start to look quite primitive. We just happen to be the best fighters, so we survived. We're quite a brutal branch of the human race. These other guys, they will have had all the knowledge and the information and the capabilities way, way beyond anything that we've got, because every part of the brain, things we're only just, discovering now that we're only just touching on, they would have taken that for granted. So once you've got the mechanics there and you've got these super brains running, you start to think, well, what about spirituality? What about the ability to see the future? What kind of relationship did they have with the divine? Their memory capacity, if they were able to pass memories on, how far back could they remember? They wouldn't need a laptop. They'd just be walking around with all that information contained in the head. And we've lost it. We only lost it relatively recently. Some of the Paracas skulls in South America are only, 500, 600, 700 years old. So it's only because the Spanish went over there and, released things like smallpox and whooping cough and flu and all that. That's the only reason those guys died out. So until relatively recent times, you could have sat down and had a chat with one of these fellas with the enormous heads.
Now, these heads, Mark, are all around the world. They're in Peru, they're in Central America, the Mayans and the Incas you just mentioned. Are those the same big brains that are telling them how to build their pyramids and everything?
Yeah, basically. I mean, that story is quite plausible because they had them in Egypt. You look at Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, and their skulls, the shape of their heads are enormous. They were there in southern Russia. They had the Huns and the Pazariks and the Scythians. A lot of them had these elongated skulls. Up to medieval times in Europe, it was quite a thing to have one of these people with the enormous heads in your household. So there were quite a lot of medieval European slaves. They were trading ladies with these enormous heads. They were trading them into Europe as recently as the 1200s, the 1300s, and then you've got the copycats. There's people stretching skulls artificially, and they still, unofficially, off the record, the Mayans are still doing that today. They're still binding children's heads to do that.
Yeah. But Mark, you can differentiate between those that are made stretched by mankind or
Yes,
those
yeah.
genetically. Yeah.
Yeah, you can. I mean, if you look at the ones that are man-made, if you bind a skull or you cradle board it, which is flat board a skull and push it, and make it bigger, you can see what's been done mechanically to do that. And genetically, your starting point is basically still one of us. If you look at some of the Paracas skulls, they are absolutely mind-boggling. They have different sockets. They have no joints in the skull plates. The opening at the back of the skull is in a different place for different support. When you start looking at them, it's quite obvious just from the physical remains that the DNA, the programming in those people, is fundamentally different. You're looking at a different species. But obviously, if we've tried to copy that, if people have tried to do it with head binding and stuff like that, there must be an advantage to having a bigger cranium. Maybe the brain does actually expand into the extra space. If you give a brain more space to operate, maybe it operates better. So these are issues that I delve into in the book. I go into quite a lot of detail with evidence and things in Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. The mystical history of glass bit obviously is the crystal part of it, and the extinction of the world is this idea that things are devolving, things are kind of slowly going down, as it were, and that's a battle we're never going to win, because
you just mentioned something nature. Mark, you just mentioned something a while ago about a group of these big-headed people, elongated headed people sitting around and brainstorming and coming up with the pyramids, and they had all this knowledge up here, and that's why they didn't write it down, because they had it here, and when they passed, it went with them, or either they flew off Earth or they died, and all that information went with them. They didn't want anybody else to have it except
in ancient times, the idea of memory, the entire Druid religion ran from the Bronze Age. So the Druids are like 3,500, 4,000 years old. They never wrote anything down. They just passed it from one person to another. You were 21 before you could graduate as a Druid, because it took you your entire educational life to learn what they knew, and a lot of it was done that way, by that kind of learning. And again, it's a case of chance. When you get into your archaeology, your history, your genetics and all that, what we have is, if you like, the dwindling remains of a disaster. So, we're kind of picking up pieces of the jigsaw. We don't have the full picture. Even if you go down the aliens route, we still don't have the full picture.
Right.
That's, ancient aliens are saying that. We're saying, we can see all these different hints. Eric, bless him, when he did Chariot of the Gods, Eric von Daniken, all he did was make us think, make us look at these things in a different way to the way we were looking at them back then. Archaeologists were just all about, looking at the culture and the date, and that was it, not where the information was coming from. So quite clearly, these guys with these enormous heads and that, if aliens were involved, I'm not saying they were or they weren't, but if they were involved, that particular race of humans, who were quite clearly genetically humans, obviously they were capable of communicating with other life forms far better than we are today. If an alien landed, 3,000 years ago or even longer, in an area like Babylon or something like that, the people would come out and go, hey, the gods are visiting us, let's have a chat. If one comes down on the White House lawn, in the next week, it's likely to get itself blown up. We'll attack, we'll try and shoot it. That change in approach and attitude is what's kept us, shall we say, where we are now, slightly entrapped.
Yeah, I want to finish off with this big head thing, because when I was in high school, they'd look at me and they say, "Look at the head on that thing."
I seem to be developing one as I'm getting older. I
wear a big hat. I guess a 9 or something like that. But no. Let's go back to one of the crazy stuff. I know us being musicians, we could do that.
Well, I'm gonna chip this in as a bit humorous. In Egypt they all have that crown, that amazing crown, and they all wear these weird hats.
Right.
That's for real. Most of their heads actually filled those things. They were in there, and a lot of the archaeologists, they only show that kind of view from the front, but when you turn these guys on the side, there's some enormous headwork going on back there. There really is some phenomenal stuff, and some of the pictures do appear in the book. I managed to get that into the book.
Great. Now Mark Olly, I'm talking to Mark Olly, a great guy, very talented, but you take an academic approach, but you also take an open-minded approach to a lot of your studies, right?
Yes, there's a definite collision there.
Mhm.
Academia has a certain way of doing things. Academia has certain approaches, certain standards. You've got to meet the target of academia in a sense, and I've got that as a background, which I then sort of reapply. So there's a couple of books I've written where people have gone, oh, that's not an academic subject, but I've approached it in an academic way. So don't be fooled by the titles or the contents of these books. If you go to the background research, that's solid, and if somebody throws any nonsense at me, I'm notorious for shooting nonsense down. I'll tell you a little bit of trivia because it's connected to Ancient Aliens. I'm sure the producers won't mind me telling you this, but they sent me some footage for me to comment on. And it was a group of flying saucers that had appeared over the fields in somewhere like Wiltshire. And they said, can you please comment on this footage? So I'm looking at this footage and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, that's not UFOs. They're Chinese lanterns. These things you set fire to and they float up and they kind of sit there in space. So I said to them, I said, look, I can't comment on that because anyone that's a serious ufologist, anyone that seriously knows what they're looking at, academically, that is just not right. You can't use that footage, get rid of it. And I told them about the footage then about this crop circle forming. And I'm really pleased that they went off and found it. So that particular program on crop circles, even just that clip, it's such an improvement on where they were going with it. So academically, I'm not afraid to stick my neck out and say that's wrong. But equally as well, I'll stick my neck out and say that's right. If something really does defy explanation, and it's got the background. I knew about that footage, because I actually met the guys that filmed it. I met them at a conference in the 1990s. And they were out UFO spotting somewhere down south, and they picked this footage up. They retrained the cameras on the field when they noticed this thing whizzing round, and that's how they caught it. And to the best of my knowledge, I think it's the only time that's ever really been filmed correctly doing that. It's actually happening, and I just happen to know that because I am open-minded enough to go and talk to people. In a way that's academic, so I remember it, and the data and the knowledge is there. So yeah, I've got that background as well. I mean, I started in archaeology down a hole when I was 8 years old. I trained when I was 16, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, probably about 21, 22 before I actually left the academic side of archaeology to go into the music business. And I don't know if people know this, but when you're in the music business, if you're on tour, if you're going around places, there's loads of time that you need to kill. What do you do for an afternoon? If you're playing a gig in the evening, you'll appreciate this. So, wherever I've gone, around the world, around Britain, whatever, I've gone off and carried on looking at the archaeology. So I had 20 years of all expenses paid, going around nosing at all these sites, But yes, I have a hefty side of me that's UFO, paranormal, the investigator in me never goes away.
I have to ask this question. You knew the question's going to come up, Mark. I'm a UFO and ET experiencer, wrote a book and everything. Heavy into that. Have you ever seen a UFO?
I could answer that really simply. Yes, I have. I was out with some of my friends as a teenager, and I saw one of the famous, the stars under control type UFO, where it flies onto the star field and then bounces back and then zips off. That was the first thing I ever saw. But there's a very famous encounter up here that happened in the late 70s, early 80s. I'd have to look the date up now. And where something flew up the Mersey Valley. It's in one of the Jenny Randall's books for the UFOs over here. And I was a witness to that. And it was most definitely like the small craft that you see in Close Encounters. It was lights on, came through the steam on a power station, and then when it got to Warrington, which is where I live here, I was viewing it from a hilltop. When it got to Warrington, it just shot off into the sky. And then after that, going out doing digs, being on archaeological sites, being out in the open air, you see all kinds of weird things whizzing around in the sky that are, quite clearly they're not satellites or shooting stars, so I am definitely a believer in that, although my explanation, which appears in the Crystal Skulls book, might interest folks.
Okay,
because
that's a teaser, huh? A teaser.
Well, it is. I mean, I could just come out and tell you. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not a great fan of things whizzing in and out of planet Earth. I don't think that's happened. I'm a great believer that the moon landings, for example, never happened, and NASA are just this enormous technological company that are just trying to cover up what they're up to. But that's
And
a whole.
And history is all wrong, right?
Yeah. The moon landing has just been disproved, tens of thousands of times over. But if you can't get in and out of the planet, then what on earth's going on with all these things that we keep seeing? I'm a believer that they're actually time travelers. I think they're coming in from their own dimension, if you like, if you want to look at it that way, their place in time and space. They're jumping to ours and then jumping back again. But I don't think they're coming from the past. I think to some extent, past, present, and future are irrelevant to them. I think they're just coming in and materializing and appearing here, and that's why we see them in the way that they are and the way that they appear. I think they're another species of us. I quite firmly believe that's what they are.
That's a great theory. There's a lot of humanoid ETs that have been seen, and they're actually, like Dr. David Jacobs says, they walk amongst us.
Yes,
let's go to this. Let's go to this one last point on your book, Crystal Skulls. You said this book takes the reader on a magical mystery tour. Are you talking about the four chaps that you back in the early '60s?
Well, they were only 16 miles down the road, because I live only 16 miles away from Liverpool. So
really?
Yeah, the Fab Four, yeah.
And it enlivens the mind, reaches some startling conclusions, and may just change the way humankind sees its future. Now, mysticism or mystery is something big in some churches. Could you tell us a little bit about that, Mark?
Well, when I started going through the book, when I started writing it under lockdown, I very quickly became aware that there was a religious and spiritual dimension to the material that I was handling. Because the obvious thing is, do we evolve or are we created? Well, if we're created, there has to be a creator. If these guys are jumping back and through time and space, where do they come from? Again, that's almost like a mystical religious question. If there are all these different species of human beings, when we were made originally, it kind of flies in the face of the evolutionary theory. There was lots of us, and now we're decreasing. So I'm swimming in a sea of mysticism and religion just by producing the book. And I do have some background in that, because in the 1990s I actually trained as a vicar, so I've got my religious background. I've got that as well. I'm actually working on a Bible kind of based thing at the moment, which
that's great.
Might come out later on, but I'm looking at that. So there's a kind of that thread runs through the book, but I'm not limiting myself only to the Judeo-Christian path. There's lots of other material in there, quotes and observations. It's there. It's there in the book.
Right. Well, I believe in the in angels and the spirituality. And things. But I think the modern day churches and our approach to it, we're losing touch of the actual mysticism that actually came along, with Jesus and his disciples. And so we're kind of losing all that. Of course, our world is now going downhill by moral wise and violence, all this other stuff. And we need to get peace in this world, and we need to get peace from within us ourselves. And you're going into the spiritual part of it, Mark. That's great. We'll be looking forward to that one.
Yep. Well, there's an element of that in the conclusion in the book, because you've got to say, well, is there a pattern? Is there a structure? Right. Is what we're seeing in some way, deliberate? Is it organized? Is it planned or programmed? So obviously with questions like that, you've got to come up with a conclusion at the end in the book. Excuse me. I think planet Earth goes in phases. People that look at Atlantis and they look at Atlantean things, they'll agree with this entirely, that was back then, that was that phase. That phase came to an end. Then you have our phase, our phase will come to an end, and then the next phase starts again, and so on. That seems to be how history's worked. You can draw a line, there's usually a disaster, a flood or an ice age or who knows what. There's usually something that closes that age down. So inevitably, that question comes up at the end of the book. And I do look at the state of where we are now. You've got all this kind of movement to try and, preserve species, preserve the planet. I look at all that and I think, well, at the end of the day, there seems to be something going on behind it all. Are we fighting against our own planet? Are we fighting against who or whatever it is? Maybe you might think of God as being an alien. Who knows? Whatever it is, it's way above us. It's miles above our pay grade. So however you look at it, you kind of wonder if we're fighting against what is in the end maybe inevitable, or if we do die out, if we do go gracefully into the night, how do we do it? Where are we going? What's going to happen? You've got World Economic Forum, you've got the World Health Organization, you've got all these unelected people and unelected governments, and you name it, all these different things going on in the world. I don't think any of them have got a handle on what's actually happening. I don't think there's, a science community or a church or a religion or, I don't think any particular group has, as it were, the absolute answer, the absolute solution. If by some miracle we could get everybody together, all the millions of people that are on planet Earth, if we could somehow get them all together and get them to talk to each other, that's what the internet was supposed to be, but it's not, because now it's censored. If we could get everybody together to talk to each other, we might get somewhere. We might get closer to whatever God is. If we're all chips off the divine, if we're chips off the old block, then maybe there is a solution. But I don't see that coming immediately after what we've just experienced with COVID and lockdown and all the rest of it. I don't see what they're presenting now as a solution. I'm a little bit radical in that way,
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to die. I'm going to be gone in like 30 or 40 years time. No one's going to be bothered about me because I won't be here. Chances are we'll all be gone. There's a lot of our generation will be gone. I've got a lot of older friends and that.
You're going to leave a legacy though with your music albums and your books, Mark. You're going to be leaving a legacy there. But I see a lot of these people that are elites. Maybe some of them are evil intentions. They're causing division amongst us. We're talking about monetary divisions, racism divisions. So it's going right down the line. And actually, if you leave us alone and quit poking us to do something different, I think the human race, the good can come out of people and get this all squared away. Mark, is that what you're saying?
It's interesting because they're saying, we've got the solution, let's unite everything. Let's make everything work by uniting it. But actually, that's not what they're doing.
No.
What they're doing is they're destroying the unique aspects of the human race. Right. And it's those unique aspects that we've lost with the extinctions that have happened in the past. So you're back into the book again. Boy, do I wish we could bring all those people back. So we're losing that. And then they seem to be going to war on diversity. They're going to war on the differences that all these different societies and different structures and different systems have. That's the very thing, archaeologically and historically, that's meant that we've survived. We survive on the basis of our differences, not on the basis of our similarities. When they started to do GMO crops, genetically modified and all that, and they had these perfect plants and they went and dumped them into fields, the rest of the planet attacked them, because there's nothing perfect. Everything's imperfect. It's all imperfect. So you could almost say that being imperfect is perfection. The Masons believe that when they build a building, they never build a building completely perfect. They always put a deliberate blunder in there somewhere. And the argument is that nothing's perfect except God. Well, they've kind of got it right, because there isn't anything absolutely 100% perfect. You can't do that. That's just not how the planet operates, So these guys that are, coming out with these, these doctrines of, oh yes, we'll all be the same, we'll all unite, this, that, and the other. It's never going to work. Never. It's never worked in the past. It doesn't work in nature. The planet isn't made that way. It ain't going to work. What we need to do
Mark,
is,
what I try to do sometimes. I try to tell my wife that I'm perfect. That doesn't work. That doesn't work.
You're wrong when they burst out laughing.
So I say, no, I am not perfect. I know that. I study, ancient history and from Enoch all the way up. I've studied that. I know you have too. You've taken a look at that. That's probably why you're getting involved in mysteries and
Yeah,
you know, the spirituality. And Mark,
well,
I guess,
I actually say it in the book. You know, there's only one of you, and there's only one of me.
right?
So as soon as somebody with knowledge and information and a unique identity dies, that is actually an extinction event.
Mhm.
Because that person who is completely unique, you've got no idea what they could have offered or could have put into the human race. That person is no longer there. They've gone, and everything that they were have gone. It's an extinction event. And I do make that point in the book quite strongly. You know, you can't just go around wiping out people because they're different. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, right. I see in wars, I've been in combat, and I don't like, I wrote a book about senseless wars and conflicts, my second book released last year. But yeah, to me, it was a personal thing to see people, because usually it's the poor people who fight and die, and it's the rich people, the elites, who gain money from it, you know?
Yeah,
Is that
it's
right, Mark?
always been that way. Yeah, it's the ones at the top that know why they're doing what they're doing, and if they actually told the ones at the bottom would go, "Nah, I'm not fighting for that. You can stuff that." So yeah, there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of sort of us and them in that kind of situation. Luckily, in my generation, we managed to miss most of the conflicts. I say that, most of them, but you know, there's like 60 or 70 wars being waged on planet Earth in any given year, you know, and it's been that way really since the end of the Second World War. So we really haven't sorted that mess out at all. You know,
Right, like in medieval times in Europe and in your country,
yeah.
if a king got mad at another king, he'd tell his people, well, go kick their butts.
Yeah,
and he sat back and watched, you know.
Now, you know.
We're going to close out now. So tell us where we can get your books and how we can contact you on the internet.
Okay, it's really simple. Very, very simple. Type my name into Amazon. I'm going to say go to Amazon and you will find all of the books that I've written. I think there's 9 of them now in total, soon to become 10. So if you go on there, type my name in, they're all, you know, just go on there, click on what you want, dump it in the basket, pay for it, and it'll come through your letterbox a couple of days later. That's the way to do it. So Amazon for that one. Excuse me. If people want to get in contact with me and see what I'm doing, have a look at the adverts for the various things I'm doing, including the band. Facebook. I know everybody hates Facebook, but that's where I am. I'm on Facebook. So come and friend me. Come and find me. I'm on there. And as long as your name's not Fifi Trixabel and you've not got a fairy as an icon, you know, and when I click on you, you've only got 3 photos. You've only been on there like 3 days. As long as you don't, you know, you're not one of those. As long as you come on there and you're real and you're genuine, because I do check everybody. I will accept you. You know, I will accept you. So it's either Amazon or Facebook. Come and find me.
Okay, buddy. That was Mark Olly, and he's a good chap, and not a mate, but a chap. So I'm getting that straight. This has been the Dave Emmons Show, and this is part 1. We'll have part 2 with Mark Olly coming up 2 or 3 days after I distribute this part 1. And thank you, everybody, and thank you, Mark Olly, for this show. Great, tremendous. I like your spunk, and you're a good chap. All right.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.